Good afternoon, distinguished colleagues and guests. Today it is the 25th of April 2022, 12 p.m. according to Moscow time. Allow me to consider open the meeting of our Dissertation Council, Ilina, for the degree of Candidate of Psychological Sciences, Scientific Specialization 535, Social Psychology, Political and Economic Psychology, on the topic Social and Psychological Phenomenon of Emotional Burnout in Women on Maternity Leave. According to the order of the Academic Secretary of St. Petersburg University, Alexander Gnotov, from the 16th of February 2022, number 12-36-1, me, Posakova Svetlana, Doctor of Psychological Sciences, Professor of the Department of Psychology of Education and Pedagogy of St. Petersburg University, was appointed as the Chairperson of this Dissertation Council, and by the same order, our fellow board members were appointed. Let me introduce them. Valentina Mikhailovna, Professor of the Department of General Psychology, St. Petersburg University. Lyudmila Pachebut, Doctor of Psychological Sciences, Professor of the Department of Social Psychology, St. Petersburg University. Anastasia Mikляева, Doctor of Psychological Sciences, Associate Professor, Professor of the Department of Psychology of a Person, Russian State Pedagogical University, named after Herzen. In the remote interactive mode, we have got Koev Christy, Doctor of Psychological Sciences, Professor of the Department of Theory of Education, Tartu University, Estonia. Can you see and hear us? Is everything okay with connection?
Yes, thank you.
Our candidate is also here with us, Tatiana. Scientific supervisor is also here with us, Doctor of Psychological Sciences, Professor, Head of the Department of Social Psychology, Svetlana Murieva. In order to improve our communication, dear colleagues, Christy Koev, please switch off your microphone before the floor is given to you. Please switch off your microphone. Audio and video recording is being provided, as well as live broadcast at St. Petersburg website. Simultaneous interpretation is also being provided from Russian into English and from English into Russian. At the same time, electronic email is being stated, and during this broadcast, questions can be addressed to our candidate, as well as opinions can be expressed concerning the report of the candidate, and take part in the scientific discussion. These questions will be forwarded to me by technical specialists, and I will voice them during the discussion. And the questions should be related strictly to the report, and name, surname, patronymic and position and place of work should be stated of the author of the question, and questions which are not related to the scientific discussion, to the text and assessment of the dissertation, as well as anonymous question, won't be voiced. In accordance of awarding academic degrees of doctoral sciences, candidate of sciences stated by the normative acts of St. Petersburg University, the meeting of the board is considered eligible if at least 2/3 take part in its work, not less than 4 people. Our Dissertation Council consists of 5 people. All 5 members are present, and 1 member is in the remote interactive mode. Audio-visual contact is provided. Thus, we have got quorum. And please, the worker of the Dissertation Councils curator of the defense, please form the attendance sheet. The agenda of today's meeting is the following. The duration is approximately 2 hours. A brief report of the chairman about the candidate and the documents submitted by the candidate. Answers to possible questions. A brief report of the chairperson reflecting the main statements. Number 3, questions to the applicant strictly according to her report, no more than 2 minutes per question. Number 4, answers of the applicant, no more than 15 minutes for all questions. Then, if there are external reviews, we will voice them. Number 6, speeches of all members of the Dissertation Council in turn, with the assessment of the dissertation research with a summary of their positions, with questions and suggestions for the dissertation, about 10 minutes per speaker. Then the speech of the chairperson with the review, about 10 minutes. Number 8, answers of the applicant for a scientific degree to questions and comments of the members of the Dissertation Council, no more than 20 minutes. Number 9, open discussion, speeches at the request of those present at the defense of the dissertation with a summary of the positions and of specific questions and proposals for the dissertation strictly on the topic of the research. At the same time, all interested people are requested to register in the registration form and completely introduce themselves before your performance. Number 10, presentation by the chairperson of questions addressed to the applicant, which came in order to discuss her speech and scientific discussion on the broadcast of the meeting of the Dissertation Council of the St. Petersburg University website. Written questions which take more than 2 minutes won't be voiced. Number 11, answers of the applicant. Then speech of the scientific supervisor of the applicant, no more than 3 minutes. Then discussion of the results of the defense by the members of the Dissertation Council before the open vote, during which the sound of the broadcast is muting, about 5 minutes. 14, open roll call, counting of votes by the chairman of the Dissertation Council with the entry of the results into the minutes of the meeting. 15, making a decision on awarding or not awarding an academic degree. Concluding remarks of the applicant, no more than 2 minutes. Dear colleagues, are there any questions or objections to this regulation? If there are no objections, I will proceed to the implementation of the rules of the meeting. But before, please turn off the sound of your mobile phones. Dear board members who are in the remote interactive mode, don't switch off your mobile phones. Don't switch off your mobile phones in order to provide communication with you in case of technical breakdowns. And so I'm starting to conduct the meeting. Dissertation of Ilina for the degree of Candidate of Psychological Sciences, Scientific Specialization 535, Social Psychology, Political and Economic Psychology on the topic Social and Psychological Phenomenon of Emotional Burnout in Women on Maternity Leave, was accepted for the defense by the order of Academic Secretary of St. Petersburg University from the 26th of January 2022. Ilina, Tatiana, wrote her dissertation research on the basis of St. Petersburg University as a postgraduate student, and her scientific supervisor and Doctor of Psychological Sciences, Professor, Head of the Department of Social Psychology, Svetlana Gurieva. The number of publications of the candidate: 3 publications, 3 articles in peer-reviewed scientific publications from the list approved by the Ministry of Education and Science of the Russian Federation. General number of publications is 10. All documents submitted, documents by the applicants conform with the requirements and are stored in the applicant certification file. Their copies are held by an employee of the Department for Maintenance the Activities of Dissertation Councils, who is now in the hall. Before giving the floor to the applicant, dear board members, do you have general questions to the applicant? And if there is a necessity to announce and consider the entire list of documents submitted by the applicant for the defense? No questions. Now, brief presentation of the applicant. You have got 15 minutes strictly. The floor is yours. Thank you very much. Svetlana Timofeyevna, good afternoon, dear board members, dear guests. Allow me to introduce my dissertation paper on the topic social and psychological phenomenon of emotional burnout in women on maternity leave. The work was written under the guidance of Professor, Head of the Department of Social Psychology, Svetlana Gurieva. The actuality of the research is every woman faces with the maternity questions. There is a wide spectrum of questions: child-free movement, and so on. The dream of being a mother, and so on. According to the survey of 2019, 90% of Russian women don't want to have children, and total deepening into the maternity, and now it is a choice. Our experience of work with women shows that those who dreamt of being a mother, in practice, the state of emotional burnout is considered as maternity emotional burnout. The use of the term emotional burnout in scientific literature is poorly studied, and there are no. And in order to solve this problem, maternity is considered as a special type of activity. Bazilev, Zakharova, and Ivanova, 2015, studied this question. They characterize maternity as a special activity which includes the characteristics of labor activity. And scientific novelty is stipulated by the fact that phenomenology was elaborated and the term of emotional burnout is considered as a special state of a woman and interaction children-parents, and emotional burnout is highly considered. Theoretical and practical significance of the research is as follows. The term of emotional burnout was identified, the state of physical and emotional burnout, which comes from stressful activity of a mother. Structural model was elaborated, which can be used in practice of psychological consulting. Of a woman training program was offered to correct emotional burnout, and methodology was modified, the wheel of life balance, and this section of the research can be used in the courses of psychology, interpersonal relations. The aim of our research became the study of psychological phenomenon of emotional burnout in women. The object of the research were women on maternity leave. And the social and psychological peculiarities were: the state of emotional burnout was studied carefully, and it is connected with social and psychological peculiarities of mother personality. The hypothesis of the research is the high level of emotional burnout, and we can meet it in women of the crisis of zero identity, and there is connection between the level of emotional burnout in mothers and professional life. In order to achieve our aims and test our hypothesis, the following tasks were formulated. They are represented in the slide. Please allow me not to read them out. Provisions for the defense. Emotional burnout can be reflected as a special somatic complexes. It can be shown in 3 levels: high, medium, and low. Modern model of maternity can be understood as a special type of activity which is close to the activity of workers of supplementary professions, and this type of activity is complicated by sense and emotional components. The syndrome of emotional burnout in women on maternity leave is shown in women with favorable social conditions. The strategies, how to cope with stress, the general level of coping with life, subjective feeling of social isolation, and the amount of free time. And structural model of this model of emotional burnout, and it stipulates the logics of proliferation of emotional burnout. And we surveyed mothers of St. Petersburg. 177 women took part in this survey who had from 1 to 3 children, 22 to 45 years old. Average age was 31 years old. These women don't have chronic diseases. Only 8 women out of 177 did not have official relations with their partner. And recycling data is represented in the slide. Please allow me not to read them out. And please let me turn to the results of the research. The level of emotional state. Out of 177 women, 96 had low level of emotional burnout, 56 average, and 25 women had high level of emotional burnout. Among the women with a high level of emotional burnout, they had the crisis of personal and role identity. At the same time, there was pseudo-positive identity. In practice, it means that women totally connected with emotional role. We found out that the strategy of flee from difficult situation, they are used by the women with high emotional burnout. Women with low emotional burnout use a strategy of cognition, repetition, rehearsal, and cognitive rehearsal is a mathematical predictor of low level of emotional burnout. Then, the test of hypothesis of the connection of the level of emotional burnout in connection with gender distribution in women of high level of emotional burnout. They don't accept responsibility distribution in the family. And as for the level of satisfaction in different spheres of life, and balanced of will of life balance. There are no connections. And the connection of the level of emotional burnout and general satisfaction of life we found out. The level of correlation between emotional burnout and maximum scores according to the scales shows the meaning of these differences. The higher the level of emotional burnout, the lower the level of satisfaction according to different scales, and the connection of the level of emotional burnout and subjective satisfaction of women. We have found out women with low level of emotional burnout actively engage social responsibilities when they take care of children. We found out that women with low level of emotional burnout find time to go in for sports and hobbies. Women with high level of emotional burnout can't find time for sport. All the data was generalized and were used in the elaboration of structural model of burnout, which is presented in the slide. Apart from that, on the basis of the data we obtained, training program was elaborated on emotional burnout in women on maternity leave. Individual and group formats were elaborated. The main results include 3 blocks: psychological preparations, I conception, and emotional conception. All the results presented allowed us to formulate the following conclusions. The phenomenon of professional burnout in women, which involve physical and emotional burnout connected with stressor in women on maternity leave. Secondly, the peculiarities of modern model of maternity is similar to the workers of additional professions, and we found out that the factors which are connected with the level of emotional burnout, special strategies with the level of stresses, the level of satisfaction in different spheres of life, gender distribution of roles in the family, and free time for restoration, and special training program was elaborated on prevention and correction emotional burnout in women on maternity leave. In conclusion, using 177 women, we studied the phenomenon of emotional burnout, and it does not only negatively affect the life of women on maternity leave, but it also reflects on physical state of a woman, and not only a phenomenon of maternity burnout should be studied, and further work is planned to expand and specify the research and specification of social demographic characteristics. We plan to implement and test the results. The results of the work were voiced at scientific and practical conferences, and they were published in scientific journals. Tatiana Igorevna, thank you very much. Before giving the floor to our colleagues for questions, and I have got the question. Please show us the first slide of your dissertation paper, the very beginning. dissertation, the name of the dissertation is Social and Psychological Phenomenon of Emotional Burnout in Women on Maternity Leave. But this slide gives another name of the dissertation. I understand that the text of the dissertation and the content of the dissertation relates to your study. Is it a technical mistake? Yes, it is a technical mistake, the topic of the dissertation. And the topic of the dissertation concerns women on maternity leave. Dear colleagues, your question to our candidate. Do you have any questions? Tatiana Igorevna, tell us, please, the phenomenon of emotional burnout in women on maternity leave. Did you study the phenomenon of giving emotional satisfaction, happiness from being on maternity leave, feedback from children? Lyudmila Georgievna, thank you very much for your question. In the course of the research, these circumstances were not studied. They were taken for granted. We addressed two women who dreamt of being a mother and who realized the model of intensive maternity, and their relation to children is without doubt, and routine activity, everyday activity, leads to high level of burnout, both emotional and physical one. And the love for a child and feedback and emotional component, which is closely connected with maternity state, it does not always protect from this state. We focused on the third block, which is the essence of maternity as a phenomenon, and it involves routine operations, everyday operations. For example, the work of a child carer needs money, and thank you very much. Are there any other questions? No questions. Yes, we will discuss them in the course of our discussion. Anastasia Alexandrovna, your questions. All women realize the model of intensive maternity. Why do you think so? Some questions from methodology, the evaluation of the level of emotional burnout, we considered at a pilot stage of our research. Many questions concerned the relation to a child, to what extent a woman can have a rest without a child, and in connection to that, indeed, these are mothers who are deeply connected into maternity state. Please specify. You speak about not about the model of intensive maternity. It is the model of involvement into maternity role. Intensive maternity, it is a special form of the realization of maternity role. I see that it's your observation. It's not a result of special research on the basis of the survey. I agree with you. There were no special tools which could evaluate this intensive maternity state. It is the observation which came from the characteristics of our sampling. These were women who were involved into maternity stage. We did not test it separately. Dear colleagues, any other questions? I have a question. After your research, Tatiana Igorevna, can we define what maternity is? Special definition as a phenomenon. In the course of our research, I concluded that maternity could be viewed not only as a phenomenon connected with great emotional and meaningful components, and scientific novelty includes the third component, which is included into realization of routine activity. In our opinion, this third block is without attention, and I think that it is necessary to consider maternity as a multifaceted phenomenon, and it's impossible to state exactly, and it can be the continuation for further research. Thank you very much. Dear colleagues, do you have any other questions? No questions. Let us turn to the reviews of the board members. The first review, Valentina Bezova, the floor is yours. Let me focus on the main moment. The logical basis of the research is very specific. Phenomenology of maternity was specified, highlighted. The necessity of subjectivization of a woman was defined. Subjectivization of women personality was defined, and the necessity of the study of its personal, emotional, and psychological characteristics. The author showed the level of emotional burnout is not connected with objective external conditions of realization of a woman, of its maternal functions. Structural model of the phenomenon of emotional burnout was elaborated. The range of personal psychological characteristics were described. They help increase the level of emotional burnout, and author's modification of methodology wheel of life cycle was elaborated by the author. Life balance was taken into account in order to study the level of life satisfaction in women on maternity leave. The main theoretical research was represented in 3 chapters. Theoretical aspect contains the information about the phenomenon of maternity state, subjectivity of maternal state, problems of maternity, modern models of maternity as a type of in the context of modern culture, and the development of syndrome of emotional burnout in women on maternity leave. Chapter 2 is devoted to empirical study, social and psychological determinants on crisis of identity in women, methods of the research are viewed, the sampling and procedure of the research. Chapter 3 contains the results of empirical research. The program of project of prevention and correction of maternity burnout was elaborated. The work shows that phenomenon of emotional burnout is characterized as a symptom, as a complex of symptoms, and there is a linear growth of emotional burnout. There are 3 stages of this syndrome of emotional burnout. burnout, risk group, and non-burnout. And modern model can be viewed as a special type of activity. And due to high emotional involvement of a woman, the interaction with a child, and high level of social requirements towards the quality of interaction, women on maternity leave have symptoms for emotional burnout. One of the factors connected with there is a special strategy of coping with the stress, the strategy of cognitive rehearsal. It is mathematical predictor of emotional resistance of a woman. The author states that the state of emotional burnout is characterized by the low level of general state of satisfaction in different life spheres. The feeling of life satisfaction is lower with the increase of emotional burnout. For many women, mothers, the state of emotional burnout is connected with the relation to some statements about gender distribution of the roles. The lack of support increases risks of the syndrome of emotional burnout. The author states that one of the possible reasons of the symptoms of emotional burnout is unusual social isolation, limitation of the communication, and the narrow sphere of interests. The factors connected with the level of emotional burnout were found out, and it is a precious tool for the development of the understanding of maternity burnout phenomenon. The study of interaction between burnout and different social and psychological factors is in the essence of building the structure of this phenomenon, and the factors are the basis for the list of practical recommendations on prevention on the development of this syndrome of emotional burnout in women on maternity leave. Thus, the dissertation paper of Ilina is a completed research. It is logical research. It conforms with the requirements, and the main results of the research are represented in 4 scientific works in journals recommended by High Attestation Commission. On the whole, the work is very well structured, and it takes 144 pages, introduction, 3 chapters, conclusion, literary list, and appendixes, 3 pictures, 6 diagrams. The author demonstrates perfect knowledge of modern works on this problem. Among the literature list, there are 150 sources, 116 Russian. And please allow me to highlight discussion moments and some questions, remarks. What are the most considerable factors of emotional burnout? Secondly, what is important to take into account in psychological preparation of women on maternity leave? And thirdly, what is the role of maternity in the well-being of women? In conclusion, to conclude, the dissertation of Tatiana I on the topic social and psychological phenomena of emotional burnout in women on maternity leave conforms with the main requirements stated by the order from the 19th of November 2021, number 11181/1, procedure on awarding degrees, academic degrees at St. Petersburg University, and our candidate, Tatiana I, deserves the degree of the candidate of psychological sciences in the specialization 535, social psychology, political and economic psychology. Points 9 and 11 were not violated by the candidate. Board member, Doctor of Psychological Sciences, Professor Bezova. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Dear board members, there is an offer to answer after all reviews. After every review, distinguished Tatiana Mikhailovna, thank you very much. Let me answer the questions in order. What are the most considerable factors of burnout? The most significant factors associated with an increased risk of burnout in mothers include preferred coping strategies for stress, in particular the preference for the correction of expectations, hopes. Strategy is more characteristic of mothers with a high level of emotional burnout. The use of two constructive coping strategies together, cognitive rehearsal and upward comparison, were identified as a factor in reducing the risk of developing this syndrome. Thus, the coefficient of determination for these strategies is 0.439. The status of a woman's personal identity, thus the state of not accepting a new social role, awareness of the crisis of one position, is a significant factor in burnout. Women with a high level of emotional burnout are characterized by diffuse identity, which significantly differs from other groups, decreased life satisfaction, the level of correlation between emotional burnout and the overall level of satisfaction, a sharp denial of traditional ideas about the gender distribution of roles in the family, subjective feeling of insufficiency in child care assistance. Women with a high level of emotional burnout have a subjective feeling of insufficient help with the child from relatives. As for question number 3, the experience of maternity in women's well-being, the used quantitative research methods have been described in sufficient detail, but the description of the interview methodology will remain superficial, whereby from the point of view of the thesis as a whole, it is questionable to present the results of the interview data in the theoretical part of the work. The research procedures are presented without describing the ethic of research, and more attention should be paid to more detailed information on the whole research process in relation to sensitive sample. Thank you very much. Valentina Mikhailovna, thank you very much. Are you satisfied? Valentina Georgievna Pachebut, distinguished chairperson, dear those who are present. The dissertation research is written on the actual topic. And the topic is the object of the research. Tatiana Igorevna states, and this structure is constantly changing. And it's very difficult to take care of a child The hypothesis of the research is very useful, and our candidate thinks that there is interaction with between the level of emotional burnout in women on maternity leave and different social and psychological peculiarities such as status of personal identity and the strategy. Seven private hypotheses were formulated and scientific novelty of the research and the necessity secondly, phenomenology of maternity state as a special type close to characteristics. Thirdly, Tatiana I offered theoretical explanation of the term of emotional burnout in women on maternity leave. And finally, she described personal characteristics which help increase the level of emotional burnout in women. And the main thing, she elaborated the program of events of preventing of emotional burnout in women. Theoretical significance of the research is in the fact that the author theoretized the theoretical basis of maternity, and the author proposed new model of maternity as a special type of an activity and stipulated the necessity of prevention and correction of the syndrome of emotional burnout in women on maternity leave. The practical significance of the research is in the fact that the program, the model which was elaborated by Tatiana I, can be used in practice of psychological consulting and profound analysis of literature allowed to elaborate the program of empirical research and find hypotheses and psychological methods and methodologies. Tatiana Igorevna conducted a profound empirical research of emotional burnout in women on maternity leave. And the dignity of the dissertation is as follows: the analysis of maternity state as a special type of an activity. And the second one, the complex description of the phenomenon of emotional burnout in women on maternity leave. Number 3, the creation of structural model of the syndrome of emotional burnout of mothers. Number 4, the understanding of personal and social and psychological factors of emotional burnout in women. Number 5, prevention and correction of emotional burnout in women on maternity leave, the use of methods, group and individual training. Number 6, specific formulation of conclusions after each research and confession of the fact that not all hypotheses were proved. On the whole, the dissertation of Ilina is written in good scientific language. Empirical research is conducted logically. The results can be used in the practice on family consulting. The publications of Ilina reflect the main content of the dissertation. The dissertation of Tatiana Ilina on the topic Social and Psychological Phenomenon of Emotional Burnout in Women on Maternity Leave conforms with the main requirements stated by the order from the 19th of November 2021, number 11181/1, procedure on awarding academic degrees in St. Petersburg University, and our candidate Ilina, Tatiana, deserves the degree of the candidate of psychological sciences, specialization 535, social psychology, political and economic psychology. Points 9 and 11 were not violated by the candidate. Board member, Doctor of Psychological Sciences, Professor of the Department of Social Psychology, St. Petersburg University, Lyudmila Pochebut. Lyudmila Georgievna, thank you very much. Your answers. There were no remarks. Lyudmila Georgievna, thank you very much. Anastasia Vladimirovna, your review. Dear colleagues, my review is placed on the website of St. Petersburg University. My general impression from the dissertation paper, Tatiana Igorevna is a risky person. The topic is very bold, and she studied it from the very inside. And there are a lot of questions concerning your study, and it's very positive and bold step. And there is a reality behind this step. Sociologists describe the phenomenon of maternity fine. This topic is very actual nowadays. In fact, maternity, it's very ambivalent thing in our modern life and culture. And you considered maternity state from a different angle. And there are two precious results. They are explained. I was greatly impressed by the idea that pseudo-identity is the main factor of emotional burnout. And in order to feel yourself as a mother, you should conform the requirements of this role. The resources of coping with emotional burnout are connected with the opportunity and satisfaction of a woman of self-realization behind the family roles. And it is different from the imaginations that if you are a mother, you should take care of children. In fact, your empirical results state that you studied maternity state and as a psychological phenomenon. And turning from the introduction of your dissertation paper, I have some questions. There are questions and remarks. And the questions are very interesting, and I would like you to answer them in detail. One of your first provision for the defense and the key thesis of the dissertation is connected with the fact that you consider maternity as a type of an activity. It is one of the angles of maternity consideration. When I open the text that the maternity is a type of an activity, it's very strange, because as an example, you use the comparison of maternity work and child care work. The roles are different, and in my opinion, these things can't be correlated. Inside myself, there is a very serious contradiction. Can maternity be considered as a type of an activity? Self-identity is a very important thing. And the key moment of emotional burnout in women on maternity leave, it is closely connected with professional activity. The matter is that people try to have functions, and they should understand what people expect from them. You see, usually people are subject to burnout, those people who work hard. We understand that the activity, it is the subject of general psychology, and in case of professional activity, it is the psychology of labor, and the activity as a phenomenon is the subject of labor psychology. It's very difficult to consider maternity as an activity. You correlate your conclusions with social context. My question is as follows. How can you see the correlation between the activity of a mother and maternity role? Question number one. The second question, I would like you to receive. There are two global stages of maternity state: biologically oriented stage. There are some transitional variants. There are some other dimensions for these theoretical and methodological positions. What is your position? The next question, a question about structural model of emotional burnout in women on maternity leave. In fact, it is the subject of your research. What we saw during your presentation, we saw the slide, the elaborated model, but you did not explain this model to us. Can you please answer the question about the essence of this model? Please show the slide again. It would be very interesting for us. And one more question. It's question: how were the data obtained, which you call the pilot research? Introductive interview. We would like to understand how did you come to this conclusion, to this hypothesis, and how did you choose women? And my remarks. These were questions, and now my remarks. There are a lot of, unfortunately, there are a lot of remarks, but on the whole, they can be explained. The first, my remark, concerns the terms. I think that in the dissertation, it's very important to adhere psychological terms, gender problematics, gender statement, and so on. These are three main differences. And it seems to me that the terminology is very important in the dissertation. I can't clearly understand the criteria for sampling and different places of the dissertation. They are explained differently. Out of 177 women, only 146 are on maternity leave, and 31 women, are they working, or what do they do? Then you point out that an assessment was made of the content and construct validity, as well as the retest of reliability of the method of diagnosing the level of emotional burnout in mothers proposed by Bazaleva, but you does not provide data on whether data on the results of this test. And the tools used to collect empirical data are not fully described. Thus, in chapters 2 and 3, several times there are references to a preliminary interview, but neither the program of the interview nor its generalized results could be found in the text of the work. Statistical processing of the information are questionable. H square of Pearson and correlation of Pearson are different. Factor analysis is mentioned, but it is not used in your work. Content analysis and methods of statistical processing are doubtful. And of course, I would not include paragraph about the gender inequality in the family and the level of emotional burnout in mothers. And I want to say that the problem formulation is very prospective, and it is very important, and it is a sphere where we can develop ourselves. And up to this moment, I am ready to say that your dissertation conforms with the main requirements stated by the order from the 19th of November 2021, number 11181/1, procedure on awarding academic degrees at St. Petersburg University, and you deserve the degree of the candidate of psychological sciences, scientific specialization 535, social psychology, political and economic psychology. Points 9 and 11 were not violated by you. Please answer my questions in detail. Anastasia Vladimirovna, thank you very much. Thank you very much for your interesting questions and your interest for my work. As for elements of activity concerning mothers on maternity leave, if we consider through the lens of the role, it is associated with a high level of social requirements for a woman mother regarding the quality of the implementation of the maternal function. How can it be included in the phenomenon of maternity? It is viewed either from the biological point of view or from the cultural and anthropological point of view. The recent research concerns the role of a mother as a condition for psychological well-being in the development of a child's personality. The basis of this study was the presentation of the modern model of motherhood precisely as a special type of activity. Such a view in no way denies the traditional understanding of the approach. Those everyday tasks that a woman mother faces are ignored. And all these tasks at first glance seem insignificant. However, in modern conditions, we can observe an example of intensive motherhood, a term proposed by the sociologist Sharon Hayes in 1996, which is characterized by the investment of large resources, both maternal and emotional, in one's own children. In addition, in modern conditions, a mother is included in a huge flow of information describing the conditions necessary for the health and well-being of a child, and various sources may contain conflicting and sometimes mutually exclusive data. All these conditions create an extremely emotional context for the realization of the maternal function. And emotional burnout is traditionally regarded as professional syndrome characteristic of workers in helping professions. We have focused specifically on the workers in helping, on the activity component of motherhood. It seems that the work of nanny is undoubtedly considered precisely as a labor activity. speaking about a woman mother, we pay attention to a similar component of the phenomenon of motherhood, believing that the development of the burnout syndrome is due to this component. This approach allows you to stay within the accepted understanding of the term emotional burnout. However, we consider it important to agree with the opinion of our opponent that the research for the determinants of a woman's emotional burnout can be both in the area of performing routine, everyday, repetitive duties within the framework of an activity approach, and expectations, requirements, and social representations of the environment from a moon realization of the role of a mother. And a separate layer of research considered motherhood as part of the child-parent relationship, which defines the role of the mother as a condition for the formation and development of the child's personality. The author's position is to understand motherhood from the point of view of subjectivity, that is, the problematization of the motherhood as the social role of a woman, which is realized not only in the biological, social, and emotional aspect, but also in the activity in which this social role is expressed. This view allows you to focus on the personality of a woman mother as a carrier of certain social and personal characteristics, always as a subject of activity. Under the structural model of the process, the sequence and composition of the stages of work, the set of procedures and involved technical means, the identified social psychological correlates of emotional burnout in women on parental leave or maternal leave are the basis for understanding the structure of the syndrome. I agree that the presentation of the identified elements of the structure in the form of a can be a subject of discussion. However, the modern approach to understanding the structural model as a method of describing the phenomenon distinguishes the following types of structural models: hierarchical structural model, network structural model, tabular structural model. A tabular model is built on the relationships of its parts. Data of this type are placed in tables and are homogeneous objects with peer-to-peer relationships. The structural model proposed in the work is presented precisely in the form of a table, which describes the severity of homogeneous objects, factors in groups with different levels of emotional burnout. As for personal identity, singled out as one of the factors associated with the level of emotional burnout, in this case we considered personal and personal identity, in fact, as they are synonyms. Indeed, speaking of personal identity, we consider the process of individualization, self-personal identity. We consider the process of individualization, self-awareness, and self-identity, while personal role identity implies the process of identifying a person with a social group. It seems that the phenomenological nature of motherhood lies in the fact that in the process of social identification, that is the development of a social role, the role of the mother, a transformation of self-identity also occurs. As representatives of transpersonal psychology, right, the period of the appearance of a child in a woman's life, starting with pregnancy, is considered as an existential crisis of incredible scope. The period of maternal leave, chosen as the sampling criterion, does indeed appear to be a rather vague category. In fact, maternity leave is understood as the period of a woman's maternal role from the birth of a child to 3 years old, characterized by the maximum level of a woman's involvement in servicing the needs of a child, the age of a child up to 3 years, as the time spent on parental leave is also determined by the labor legislation of the Russian Federation. Nevertheless, some women, 31 out of 177 respondents, carry out a certain amount of labor activity during the period of maternity leave. And we have to admit that the text of the work, the results of processing the obtained data, are presented very concisely. It seems that the description of the psychological significance of the results obtained was of great value in this case. However, the formulated conclusions are based on the data of statistical processing. So when applying the parametric criteria for evaluating the data obtained, a check was made of the correspondence of the distribution to the normal one in terms of the parameter level of emotional burnout, expressed in points using the Kolmogorov-Smirnov criterion, Form 86, according to the results of assessments by age and by the level of emotional burnout. The respondents in the sample are distributed significantly close to Gaussian distribution. Since our study did not imply the use of experimental research design, it does not seem legitimate to talk about causal relationships or the influence of the factors under consideration on the level of emotional burnout. In presenting the results of the obtained data, we tried to focus on the identified relationships between their variables without stating the fact of the influence of the one variable on another. One small questions. And in this moment, how can you define whether it is maternity state? Maternity is a complicated psychological and social phenomenon, and it stipulates the continuation of a human being as a type, including the maternity, which can be considered a special type of an activity of adults, in the course of which maternity role is being realized. Kristi Koev, the floor is yours.
Добрый день. It is a pleasure to be with you and to participate in the PhD defending process, who is giving an overview of the review about main parts of the dissertation. This thesis research gives a significant new knowledges to investigate the large array of contextual and psychological factors associated with material burnout, especially emotional burnout, in the Russian community-based population, in order to contribute to better introducing the K phenomenon and to explore its determinants. Emotional burnout is vital in the field of social psychology, connecting the society to the personal domains of the individual and explaining its impact in general on psychological health of vulnerable individuals as women on maternity leave. The topic of the thesis is current and relevant in the context of up-to-date research, in the relevant theoretical context connected with modern views of complex motherhood as multi-phased phenomenon in the society. The thesis is inspired from both the theoretical and empirical point of view, where both parts of the dissertation, theoretical and empirical, contains original contribution to the field. It is evidence of the deep theoretical knowledges and good orientation in the problem discussed in the thesis. In the methodological part, the coverage of the development of the triangulation of data collection through two-stage methodology and integration of research method is coherent. The most important that the author succeed in connection of 4 previously adapted research methods, wherever one of them was modified research method by author as integrated whole for analysis of the research material, showing the author's high level of research experience and expressive command of empirical methodology. Nevertheless, concerning of the methodological part of this thesis, I would like to make 2 comments. In this situation, I should like to repeat the first comment. Firstly, the used quantitative research methods have been described in sufficient detail, but the description of the interview methodology will remain superficial. Wherever from the point of view of thesis as a whole, it is questionable to present the results of the interview data in the theoretical part of the work. Second comment. The research procedures are presented without describing the ethic of the research, and more attention should be paid to more detailed information on the whole research process in relation to sensitive. I would like to emphasize that the results of the PhD research concerns a broad area of research, and their main value consists not only the detailed description of the obtained results, but also contribution to the application of the results in a practical context of prevention and correction, with a focus of the risk factors that can be associated with a level of material burnout of women on a material leave. Also, I would like to ask a candidate to answer the question during this academical defending process. Namely, if the author of the work can design a study to focus of the protective factors that can be associated with the level of material burnout of women on the material leave, what kind of research and which methodology she would like to use. Conclusion. The PhD thesis is clearly the result of a great deal of work, and much effort has been devoted to deliver a high quality thesis, bringing new evidence and an effort to expand the material burnout literature and empirical research, especially in the area exploring motherhood as a multi-phased and complex process in which a woman on material leaves can lead to emotional burnout rooted in the social interactions. To summarize, this thesis is a verse to note that the author has studied carefully a research subject with specific critical view. It is evident the fact that Tatiana Ilina deeply understands the topic of discussed problems. The reviewed thesis fulfills all the requirements aimed for obtained PhD. Thank you. And now it's time for questions and comments.
Спасибо большое.
Thank you very much. Dear candidate, the floor is yours.
Participation. Let me answer your questions in Russian, please. Отвечая на вопрос профессора.
Answering the question of Kristi Koev, I would like to highlight that the interview as a qualitative method of the research was used on pilot stage of the research in practice of psychological consulting, as well as during the period of my own being on maternity leave. And the sampling was made during this period, and the survey was made of playgrounds, and the interview was mosaic, and the data were difficult to structurize, and we included only pilot stage of the research, and more specific structuring of the interview could have become a perfect element of the work, but it was impossible to ignore the empirical experience in previous work. As for the data collection for empirical research, they were obtained by the anonymous survey with the help of Google Forms platform, and the participants of the survey were informed that this survey only for the research purposes. The firming of the sampling was by the help of Snowball, and the mothers took part in the survey from children's playground, and target audience was defined as mothers on maternity leave. Your question concerning possible design of the research measuring the protective factors, I can say the following. Then, being a practicing psychologist, and it would be interesting for us to test the hypothesis which concerns the applicability of the protocol of cognitive and behavioral approach of consulting for prevention and correction of the level of emotional burnout in women on maternity leave. And thus hypothesis would be as following: protocol of cognitive and behavioral approach in consulting women who are planning to have children. And the second hypothesis, the application of the protocol of consulting and in women on the first stages of maternity leave reduces the emotional burnout. And then we measured the emotional burnout with the use of protocol of behavioral burnout. It is necessary to form the sampling of the research control and experimental group of women who plan to become pregnant. That's all. Thank you very much. Kristi, are you satisfied with the answers?
Thank you for answers.
Да, спасибо.
Ага. Спасибо большое.
Thank you. And my review. Distinguished board members, and to conclude our, I would like to say that I considered the results and the approaches from the point of view of social psychology of different layers of the society. Recently, professional burnout as a marker in the sphere of maternity. The problem of emotional burnout is touched only partly, and this stage needs understanding social determinants and so on. Tatiana Igorevna, your dissertation is an approach for the phenomenon for the phenomenon as after birth depression. As medical practice shows, after birth depression leads to the deepening of emotional burnout up to suicide, you see, and the material you present is of high importance. The difficulties of studying of maternity is can be considered from different angles. Cultural phenomena, not only social and psychological, but also biological phenomena. Nevertheless, on the basis of the analysis of domestic and foreign studies, Tatiana Igorevna managed to uncover biological and sociological aspects of maternity state. Cultural and historical approach was used. The dissertation shows author's position both in theoretical and methodological aspects. This position has the right to exist, but it is not deprived of limitations. The model of modern maternity states the author considers is as a working activity, and moreover it corresponds with the social policy of our state and social benefits for mothers having children. Nevertheless, considering psychological aspects as a type of labor activity and correlating maternity with supportive activity, Tatiana Igorevna limits with the search for formal features. Unfortunately, the unique state of maternity nature is not taken into account. Sister mother children is not taken into account, but it is very important. In fact, the uniqueness of maternity leave is important for the risks of being on maternity leave. Correction of emotional sphere according to the results of your research. More than 40% of mothers needed emotional burnout of mothers taking care of children don't take into account the main elements of structural activity, motives, aim, and sense, and as a result, its significance for emotional burnout. The mother becomes usual specialists, and the position gave you the opportunity to conduct an interesting research, which is novel and considerable, and can be used in practice. I join all my board members, and I agree with their opinion. And the novelty is in the fact that although there are no correlations of mothers' emotional burnout in women on maternity leave and in those women who are not on maternity leave, and the level of emotional burnout is very important strategies of and balance of satisfaction of life. I am not going to concern practical significance. It is very well reflected in the speeches of my colleagues. I want to say that the completed character of your dissertation paper is here. You use questionnaire forms, projective methods as a proof of motives, and it would be better to use them, but it is the following step for your further research. I would like to focus on my remarks, which supplement your research. First of all, the research is devoted to social and psychological problems of women, mothers, but they get rid of the role of mothers. Emotional burnout is met only once, and the absence of comparison group, that is a group of mothers who did not use leave for any reason, as well as indications of the duration of the leave, the presence of work at home of the study participants, raises the question of what role the very fact of official holidays in the development and prevention of emotional burnout. The purpose of this study, set by the author at the development of a structural model of emotional burnout in mothers, is expanded in comparison with the subject and object of the study, which indicates women on parental leave. The question arises whether a model developed for a rather narrow group of mothers can be transformed to other categories of mothers, for example, to the emotional burnout of mothers raising adolescents. When reading the work, there were comments on the design of the study. Although in general they are not violated, but firstly, the description of the content of the methods could be shortened and transferred to appendices, and more attention should be devoted to the psychological content of the results obtained. Secondly, in section 2.1, research hypothesis, much attention is paid to the theoretical underpinnings of each hypothesis. It would be more expedient to make a separate section, justification of the chosen direction of the research, at the beginning of the second chapter, and then the hypothesis would be perceived as clearly directly related to the author's research. For further empirical development of the ideas of emotional burnout of mothers, it is advisable for the author to get acquainted with the work of Erich Fromm, The Art of Loving. Yes, Erich Fromm, The Art of Loving. The rest of the work is perfect. I join the opinion of my colleagues, board members, and I think that the dissertation meets all the requirements. The dissertation of Ilina on the topic Social and Psychological Phenomenon of Emotional Burnout in Women on Maternity Leave conforms with the main requirements stated by the order from the 19th of November 2021, procedure on awarding academic degrees at St. Petersburg University, and our candidate Tatiana I deserves the degree of the candidate of Psychological Sciences, Scientific Specialization 535, Social Psychology, Political and Economic Psychology. Points 9 and 11 were not violated by the dissertation candidate. Thank you very much. Svetlana Timofeyevna, thank you very much for your feedback. The phenomenon of motherhood, especially in modern society, is complex and multifaceted. First of all, this is a biologically determined mechanism of interaction between a woman and a child, which ensures the survival of the child, and consequently the preservation of man as a species, Dick Daniel. Secondly, the relationship between mother and child is based on the mechanism of attachment, a necessary pattern of behavior that determines the vector of the child's psychological well-being. In addition to the attachment of a child to the mother, there is also the attitude of the mother to the child. On the one hand, to biological grounds, the production of the hormone oxytocin, perceived as a feeling of love and tenderness. Campbell, on the other hand, to the social cultural context of the development of maternal role of a woman. Badinter, thirdly, the modern model of motherhood is defined as an element of intensive parenting, which implies a high level of involvement of the parents in the organization of the upbringing and development of the child. In our study, special attention was paid to the last of the selected elements of the structure of modern motherhood. Such a choice in no way detracts from the role of the mother's attitude to the child, her feelings and emotions that arise in the mother-child dyad. At the same time, experience shows that the tender attitude of the mother to the child does not negate the need to be included in maternal activities. It is the activity component, in our opinion, that determines the risk of emotional burnout syndrome in mothers, which became the subject of this study. The period of parental leave, chosen as a sampling criterion, does indeed appear to be a rather vague category. In fact, maternity leave is understood as the period of a woman's maternal role from the birth of a child to 3 years old, characterized by the maximum level of a woman's involvement in servicing the needs of a child. It seems that expanding the sample to two groups of respondents differing in employment status may be promising direction for further study of the problem of emotional burnout. As for Eric Fromm, I know this author, but I did not use his ideas in my research. The statements and provisions of Eric Fromm, I quote them in the practice of family consulting, and I like this book very much. Thank you very much. I am satisfied with the answers, but of course I can't but consider Eric Fromm as popular work, and my desire for future. Don't be afraid of going beyond the conventional definitions, and without getting acquainted with activity approach. You forgot about Leontiev. He was a pioneer of activity approach, and there is a lot for further study. Dear colleagues, we have finished with the reviews. Are there external reviews? Are there any external reviews? No external reviews. And are there any volunteers from the hall to have the floor? No volunteers. Well, now the floor is given to scientific supervisor, distinguished Svetlana Zakhodovna. A few words, main words about our candidate. Distinguished board members, the dissertation paper on the topic social and psychological phenomenon of emotional burnout in women on maternity leave was presented to your attention. First of all, I would like to say that in the course of the work, we got acquainted with Tatiana Igorevna, and we had constructive relations, and they allowed us to make certain conclusions. In fact, I would like to say that we conducted our study for 5 years, and my candidate is a very hardworking person. There are several moments which were accompanied. There will be the puzzles that which will allow to view this process from different angles. At first stage, we elaborated standardized interviews. We would like to answer the questions why Tatiana Igorevna started active preparation. The interview was brilliant, and there were questions which allowed understand the emotional context, the emotional burnout in women on maternity leave, and then we faced with the reality. We communicated with women on a children's playground, and in the process of the work on interviews, and we observed women who took care of children during the work. The next moment, I would like to say that Tatiana has two little children, and at first stages of this study, she wanted to take maternity leave herself, but I persuaded her to continue the research. And we decided to continue working and study. And I would like to express my gratitude to her family members who supported her. I also would like to focus on the fact that we heard a lot of dissertation papers. They all are very interesting. But when a person understands I would like to express my gratitude to everyone for this scientific discussion, for very important remarks of recommendative character. Just now, I have a main question. But this question there is a question for women. Why healthy married women who have work and who are on maternity leave, payable maternity leave, who have husbands, healthy children, why are they depressed? Why are in emotional burnout on the one hand, and why are the women in cross-cultural aspect who have more than 3 children, who don't have work, who are responsible for everything in houses, and why are they not depressed? Why don't they feel emotional burnout? It's a very interesting social and psychological aspect. I would like to look at the mechanism on substitution, compensation. Dear colleagues, thank you very much for support, for your attention, and without you, it wouldn't be possible to discuss everything today. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Svetlana Zahodovna. Dear colleagues, are there any other questions? No questions. The discussion and the acceptance of the questions are finished. We have the opportunity before the start of voting to announce. Do you have any questions? And Tatiana Igorevna, any questions concerning the procedure of our today's meeting, also concerning with the remote interactive modes. Dear Christy, do you have any remarks concerning the conduction of our today's meeting? No questions. Dear colleagues, and now our next point of our agenda, it is voting. We have the opportunity to announce the break before the announcing of the results of the dissertation. Do we need such a break? No, we don't need such a break. Now it's a 1:45 according to Moscow time. We are not going to announce technical break. I am raising the question of awarding Tatiana Ilina the degree of the candidate of psychological sciences in the scientific specialization 535, social psychology, political and economic psychology. And now an open roll call. Valentina Mikhailovna, your opinion? Please use the microphone. I agree. Людмила Георгиевна, your opinion? I agree. Anastasia Vladimirovna, your opinion? I agree. With some explanations. The key task is to find the place of your results in most social and psychological knowledge. And the problem formulation is very perfect. Christy Koev, what is your opinion?
I agree.
Yeah.
Так, согласна. Мое мнение такое же.
I agree with my colleagues, and I join the opinion of Anastasia Vladimirovna. We consider that you have a high potential which should be realized, and you should take into account all our questions and remarks. No voice in the microphone. I would like to highlight that voting for, every board member agrees that point 11 was not violated by the candidate. Let me quote it. Point 11. In the dissertation, the candidate for a scientific degree has to refer to the author and the source of borrowing materials or individual results. When using in the dissertation the results of scientific papers performed by the applicant for a scientific degree personally or in co-authorship, the applicant for an academic degree is obliged to note the circumstance in the dissertation. I remind you that the decision of the Dissertation Council is on the issue of awarding an academic degree is considered positive if more than half, but at least 3 members of the Dissertation Council who participated in the meeting voted for it in accordance with clause 23 of the procedure. The procedure is accomplished. Now counting of votes and announcement of voting results. Thus, dear colleagues and guests, I declare that out of 5 board members participating in the voting, 5 voted for, no one voted against, and no one abstained from vote. Thus, the decision on awarding Tatiana Ilina academic degree of candidate of psychological sciences in the scientific speciality 535 social psychology, political and economic psychology is accepted. Tatiana Igorevna, your final remark. Svetlana Timofeyevna, thank you very much. Dear board members, thank you very much. First of all, for the attention to my work, for your participation in today's meeting. Svetlana Zakhodovna, I join your opinion. We had a very interesting scientific discussion. Thank you very much for your comments and for your support, and I hope to use all the remarks in my further research. I hope that all board members will join me. We congratulated on successful defense, and with this scientific degree, the candidate of psychological sciences. The meeting is declared closed. Dear board members, I thank you for your participation.